So from the iPhone, which we've been talking about, to the iPad, we're moving now. With the debut of this product in April the 3rd, AT&T may actually have to cope with even more jams on its network. Craig Moffett is an analyst at Sanford Bernstein. He joins us now to talk about what Kelly was just explaining to us, that Time Warner Cable may actually be finding an opportunity here, basically because so many consumers are having a hard time keeping their signals consistent in big cities.
That's right. Remember that that a wireless network is about 95% on the ground. As Kelly was saying, it's just that last link between the device and the tower that is wireless. The rest of it's a wired network, and so they're anxious to get their hands on any wired facilities they can get.
But it's kind of a different story with the iPad as with the iPhone, right? Because iPhones, everybody's carrying around. You're making phone calls with them all the time, sometimes even when you don't know it. The iPad, or the 3 or 4 that I plan on buying, I want to use on my Wi-Fi network at home. I'm not going to be holding it in the subway. I'm not going to have it in my pocket on the way to the ball game.
Maybe. Remember that these things are being sold with unlimited data plans, and or at least that's one of the options. And this is a screen that's 9 times bigger than your iPhone screen, so it lends itself to consuming media. The short answer is we don't know how people are going to use it today. AT&T has said they think that people are mostly going to use it with the Wi-Fi connection and not tax the public network, but the reality is we just don't know. This is a new category of device, and the idea that people may sit in the back of their car and watch movies over this thing, streaming video, or whether they may sit in a park bench or anywhere else is something we're going to have to wait and see.
But it brings us back, whether we're talking about the iPhone or the iPad, to this question of how much of an advantage and how much of a challenge being the provider of choice is for AT&T for these Apple products. I mean, how is AT&T going to continue to own this space?
Yeah, look, this has been a mixed blessing because on the one hand, it has clearly brought them subscribers. It has helped their brand, or at least it did initially. The flip side of that is it has caused an enormous amount of congestion. The average iPhone customer is using, by our estimate, 300 megabytes of data every month.
Yeah, I was reading the iPhone eats twice the capacity of other smartphones. And far more than that, as much as 10 to 20 times the average device. So you're talking about the average device is priced somewhere in the range of $1.20 per megabyte for about 50 or so megabytes of consumption every month for about $60. The iPhone's consuming data at the rate of about 10 cents a megabyte. And the iPad, the answer is we just don't know. But there's an enormous downward pressure on pricing that simply comes from the fact that the same size bill is generating an awful lot more usage.
Why is the iPhone using so much more? Is it because the average iPhone user is using his search capabilities more?
Yeah,
because we were talking about a battery-saving device or design that Apple had incorporated into the iPhone that actually makes, the equivalent of 1,000 phone calls a day because it continues to turn off and on and off and on.
That's right. Well, that's separate. So one of the explanations for why AT&T has had this congestion problem, and other operators like O2 in Europe, is that the device is turning itself on and off and therefore constantly reestablishing the connection, sort of like the way a cell phone sets up a new phone call. That's one of the problems. The other is simply that they use a lot of data, and which of those two is driving, we just don't know. But remember that the reason people use more data is because it's a better screen than anything we've ever had before. If you try to surf the web on your BlackBerry, you want to kill yourself. It's just a really, really frustrating experience. On the iPhone, it's a pretty good experience. On the iPad, it's very likely to be a phenomenally good experience. And are people going to use it more because it's a better experience? Yeah, probably.
When we were talking about the NBC Comcast deal, one analyst said to me, cable companies are going to be more true to their name here. They're going to be the providers of the actual, the pipes in the system rather than the content. Tell me how these devices are changing the definition of the cable providers, of the telecom companies themselves. What business are they actually in?
Well, look, I've always thought that the cable operators are first and foremost infrastructure providers. People tend to think of them as part of the media value chain. I don't. I think of them as an infrastructure provider with in some cases, only available high-capacity pipe into the home. That's their core business, and that means, by extension, that their core business is really broadband and not video. they ought to be largely indifferent as to whether you want to get your video over the web or whether you want to get your video via subscription. They've got the pricing power to be able to say, I can make money either way, because at the end of the day, I control a scarce resource, and it's a scarce resource that people really need.
All right, thanks so much for joining us. Craig Moffett from Sanford C. Bernstein. I just want to point out you have a neutral rating on AT&T, a buy on Time Warner Cable, and on Comcast as well.
That's right.
All right, thanks so much for joining us.